Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for our next version of our education series. I'm really excited to have Bill Carrier with us, and as always, Lori McDonald. My name is Jared Heckman. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance, and I'm going to keep my intro short and allow Lori to introduce herself.
Yes, hello. Excited to be here again this week. A little bit about my background. I started Brilliance a little more than 20 years ago. I went to Purdue in computer electrical engineering, and through an internship ended up at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I eventually worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program, which was a really amazing experience. I ended up meeting my husband at NASA. He also was in engineering and also was a flight controller there through the same internship co-op program. Eventually, when we graduated from college, I went to work full-time at NASA, and he went to work full-time at Rockwell Automation. And through a job promotion he had, it brought us to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Rockwell's headquarters are. And that was in 1998, and I was trying to figure out what could be as cool as space. And so in 1998, the web was kind of in its infancy, and I decided to start a web development company. And with my technical background, and my husband was managing the largest data warehouse at Rockwell Automation, we ended up discovering that we were kind of uniquely equipped to focus on e-commerce for manufacturers and distributors. And so that's where the business is focused. And my husband left his job at Rockwell about 9 years ago, and now he leads our development team. So it's been an exciting journey. And along that journey, as we continue to work with manufacturers and distributors in the B2B e-commerce space, I was really excited when I met Bill. We connected earlier this year, and to hear about the depth of experience he has in some really amazing organizations in the B2B e-commerce space, and also from an entrepreneur perspective, creating his own business, and just really excited about the conversation we're going to have here today. So Bill, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell everyone more about your background.
Certainly. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Jared. Bill Carrier, I've spent quite a bit of time in the business-to-business industrial distribution space, as Lori mentioned. I spent a number of years at McMaster-Carr, great organization, translating their 3,600-page catalog into dynamic online experience back in the early 2000s, and putting the team together that did all of that. We built that in-house. Left there, tried to do my own entrepreneurial thing, and ultimately found my way to Grainger, where I helped them build their latest platform, Gamut.com, which has actually since been integrated back into the mothership, and they're taking a lot of that technology that we developed and integrating it into their main website. Since then, I have been out on my own consulting as part of Elastic Data. And what I do is I go and join organizations, large manufacturers, multinational manufacturers, retail companies just looking to go through major digital transformation. And I help them think about that process, usually, hopefully at the beginning of the process, and help them do that. But I've certainly jumped in once things have started. But we'll talk about some of those experiences today, and I just really am happy to be part of this educational series. Lori and Jared, you guys have brought together a lot of really interesting and dynamic people who help the discussion. You at Brilliance are helping on the technology part, replatforming, e-commerce, helping to modify and add feature sets. And I think there's a lot to think about. And through your connections, you've brought together a lot of people for this discussion. And I'm glad to be part of it.
We're glad to have you. Bill, you had shared how these projects are challenging work, and I know you would reference some of Episerver's findings from their B2B digital experiences report.
So when you first approached me, one of the things that I think is really great, Episerver put out a digital study earlier this year about digital experience, and I think it's a great setup for our discussion, because what they're finding is, regardless of the vertical that companies are in, manufacturing, retail, distribution, lots of companies are engaging in big technology projects right now. The mid 80% of companies surveyed, and hundreds of companies were surveyed, are involved in some major technology project. And what I found interesting about their findings is people feel that they're investing adequate resources, which was a surprise to me. Money is always an issue, right? It's a constraint. But people feel that they're investing the right amount of money. But then one of the key findings is that ultimately, when these projects are over, 3/4 of employees aren't feeling like they've actually made a difference on the customer expectations, and they're not meeting customer expectations. So why is that? There's study after study showing how digital transformation projects are failing to achieve the intended goals at the start. And I think that is a really interesting dynamic that I was hoping to explore with you today. What's going on? Here, this is not a new survey. People like McKinsey put out studies that say almost 80% of digital transformation projects fail. That's an astounding number for the amount of effort that goes into this.
Yeah, it is really amazing to think about. And certainly we've, over the years, seen several projects that are hurting. In many cases, that's where we get involved, is to kind of help them out and turn it around. But it's kind of scary how many projects don't go well.
As we look at this, kind of why are these technology projects failing? That's kind of a key question. And that's kind of where I come in and try to help companies with communicating. Whether a project is successful or it's a failure, to me, in my experience, it always boils down to the people. And how are the people interacting? It's rarely that technology can't be installed properly, have a good feature set. It's what is wrong? What is the failure? And it's usually a communication failure and a failure for everyone buying into the vision of, what is this change about? There's a lot involved, and the finding that EpiServer came up with as well is kind of looking at this. Their top 2 reasons for these project failures is the failure to get executive buy-in and the failure of the company culture to adopt the change, because processes change. And so that is like, how does that happen? Why do people invest, tens of thousands, or in many of the cases I'm involved with, millions of dollars and not have a good outcome? Well,
Yeah, it's really interesting because many times, so we have a really smart technical team, but one of the things that we often talk about internally and with customers is that it doesn't matter, well, not that it doesn't matter, it is really important to have a smart technical team, but it is equally important to have good communication and that buy-in and culture fits with our clients, and for their teams to be open to that change. So, Bill, what do you think are the reasons that it's hard to get that executive buy-in and that company culture is resistant to change?
I think it's a number of things, but if we're going to boil it down, think about technology implementations, whether it's replatforming an e-commerce platform or putting in a new ERP system. It's hard work. Companies are trying to do their business, their day in, day out business, and make those behind the scenes changes on technology transparent. It's seamless, and so they have to run the normal business while doing the change. When you look at the executive perspective, there's a lot of risk involved, and careers are at stake here. I just read this week in Business Insider News saying how the average tenure of CEOs has changed from 10 years in 1990 to 5 years as of 2019. That's an astounding change. You look at chief marketing officers, their role. Modern Distribution Management reported last year that the average tenure for a CMO is 18 months. So the executives in organizations, not all organizations, right, but there's a lot of turnover. And for these executives, they need to make an impact. They need to make it quick. So how are they going to commit to making these changes? Then you have at the staff level throughout an organization, you have employees who are changing. Their work is changing. The technology rarely is implemented that does not change some aspect, from minor things to major process changes where new people need to be brought into the organization. New things need to be learned. So you need to upskill in an organization. that's scary. And it gets scarier for employees when they want their paycheck, they want to contribute to the company, but they don't know what the future is for the changes in many times. So that's something that companies really need to think about, because in that kind of uncertainty and risk, people are less likely to be engaging. They're going to be more territorial. It's just natural. And it's a thing with people. Before I even started my career, I was a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. and Springfield, Illinois. So I spent my career trying to build coalitions of people, and it can be challenging without having proper tools in place and communicating that change.
Definitely. And we see in so many instances that companies are concerned, like sales teams might be concerned, to your point, about like, what's this going to mean for my role, or how will that impact me? So change can be scary, to your point.
Can you go into what are some of the risks companies are facing right now with technology projects, and perhaps describe the friction or the resistance that you're seeing on these projects?
Absolutely. So I think it starts early in projects. It's about having a plan for creating a vision. People might call them moonshots. These projects are not like rocket science. They're more difficult than rocket science. It involves social science. And so when you're working with people, you really need to have a clear vision of where you're going that people can rally around. It needs to be aspirational, and you need to have a communication plan, because all projects, whether technology or not, run into problems. How are you going to resolve disagreements about projects? When you need resources from multiple departments, how do you get people aligned to share those resources? When someone quits that's critical to the project, or market conditions change like COVID, projects need to pivot, and you need a framework for which to resolve disputes and legitimate questions about using resources and opportunity costs. And if you don't have a framework for that, you don't have a means to resolve that where everyone can get behind it. There needs to be a North Star that people can point to and have a discussion for trade-offs.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And we certainly have seen, to your point, with COVID, organizations are having to think through, like, how do we pivot and do something differently? And yet at the same time, everyone recognizes the importance of digital. And so, like, having that overarching vision, especially in times when resources may be thin, both in terms of their internal teams or with what dollars they can allocate to projects, to figure out how to work together to come to the best solution possible, is so important. How do you think companies successfully navigate cultural change that is so often a part of those large projects?
Great question. I think there are some basic tactical things that companies do implement and are important. Things like project management offices. If you have lots of different departments involved and technologies being installed, project management offices are great to have. Governance committees. So on big projects, who's prioritizing, who's allocating resources. Business plans, if you don't create business plans, you ought to be creating business plans for each of the phases. So what are the costs? What is the timeline? What is the expected benefit metrics you're going to use? That's all pretty standard, but again, I think that's very tactical, because those are process form, but still kind of that overarching goal, having a clear idea of what that qualitative narrative is, that aspirational narrative of what the project is that you're going to do. How are you changing as an organization to meet the changing needs of your customers, whatever those may be? If you're a manufacturer and servicing and back office, a lot of the work I'm involved in is not just, it's pushing some of that back office functionality into the front. It's knowledge management. It's your customer service, calling in and asking technical questions. How do you move that forward for customers as they're changing how they want to research projects? So it's really rethinking your connection points to customers and having a clear vision for what that's going to be. And so when, again, we talk about allocating resources and opportunity costs, those practices are really good in terms of project management, office, and governance, but you still need that higher level kind of, here's the strategy and goals, here's how we're going to move the business with these projects. And when you need to allocate things and make tough decisions, it's acknowledging the constraints and communicating them. Everybody needs to understand we can't do everything at once. It's a process, and here's what we're going to do, and here's what we're not going to do. And if you communicate that early, you tend to get buy-in from staff, and you have ways to resolve opportunity costs and switching resources throughout the company as you're running the company. Again, that challenge of making this all, seamless and not letting the customer see all the change that you're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, Bill, that makes me think about, we talk about healthy conflict at Brilliance, which is a little bit different than what you're talking about. You're talking about like having a common vision and a framework that you're all working towards together. And that's really important from a high level point of view. But then also I think about the importance of trust on teams for them to be, having that good communication. I know in an earlier conversation, I remember you saying to me something about how, when you're all in the meeting and everyone's like nodding their head yes, but you get out of the meeting and you find out not everyone was actually on the same page.
Yes.
And so like fostering that environment where people can feel willing to voice their opinion, is something that we work on a lot with our team. And I'm not saying by any means we're perfect at it, but I think you have to be really intentional about giving people permission to disagree and recognizing the value that exists in hearing disagreement, that it helps you make better decisions as a team. Yeah.
Absolutely. Differences of opinion are great because it helps create a better vision. So that's about process early up in developing this and people feeling heard. And then behind the scenes, you both have, with your executives and in my consulting, being able to sit in the office of a couple of people and just have a very open discussion with, are we really achieving this benefit? The other thing it prevents is if you're not clearly articulating goals, and lots of studies of employee engagement have shown that you can have company goals, but not everybody buys into those goals, or they're not even able to articulate it. And that's not unique to tech projects. That's just company engagement. So reinforcing and communicating those goals.
Organizations that are undertaking e-commerce or even digital transformation projects, they have a lot to think about. Do you, Bill, in your experience, do you find that companies usually have all this documented?
Typically not. They'll have some of it, right? So big multi-billion-dollar companies that I go and they have, people who have the strategies and the goals, and they have an annual process for what are the goals for this year. But translating that down to departments, sometimes they'll have that process. And there's a lot of overhead in this, but it's also part of just running a company really well and having everyone on the same page for driving customer service. So your customer service department, your accounts receivable department, they all have processes, but are they documented? And do you want to change them? Many of the benefits of new technology being introduced into organizations has nothing to do with the technology itself. It's about process changes that you were working around old systems, or you no longer want to do that, right? A website might enable customers to look up much of the information that previously you had to have people behind the scenes in the back office. So that's what I see is this desire to understand the back office. How do customers engage, and what does that mean within your company? And that's usually not documented as well. In my experience throughout my career, using a framework to help you think about this. It is a framework called the Zachman framework that I've used, was introduced to back in the early 2000s. The Zachman was focused on enterprise software IBM. It's a great process that kind of looks at the interrogatives of a company: who, what, where, when, why, and then looks at different processes. There's a different way of looking at things. So Zachman kind of came up with this metaphor of technology projects being like constructing a building. And there are lots of different perspectives of that. And it helps a company think about communicating to its employees, but also partners like Brilliance, and your team at Brilliance, Lori, where there's a handoff. Oh, we want a new e-commerce platform. It's not just talking to you as a feature set and saying, well, Lori, we want to be able to do these 12 things. This framework allows the company to think, you're the owner as the company. I'm the CEO of a company. What's the building I want to build? It's kind of, you have some sort of a vision, but then you hire an architect. And that's kind of where, historically I can come in. I'm a merchant at heart. I love online merchandising. That's my background, but I got sucked into broader, bigger technology projects. So what is the vision you want to create? And the framework has documents. Each of the boxes in this framework that you see have deliverables. Now, you don't have to do all of the deliverables, but some of the most important that I work on in row 1 and row 2 of this framework we talk about here is your business vision and kind of your mission. And so how do you connect those two, and how do you create business plans over multiple years to achieve that? And where's the technology going to enable you to do that? And once you articulate these things, you start to have a process. You can speak with employees, you can get their input on projects. What are we going to prioritize? You can't prioritize projects if you don't have goals and kind of what's your aspiration as a company. A framework like Zachman is helpful to think through very early in a project. Going back to the building metaphor, when you're building a building and you have the architect's blueprints, well, then you still have subcontractors. And so it's a framework to communicate the blueprint to folks like Brilliance, who are going to come in and be the electrician or the plumber, or let's say you are putting in a new e-commerce platform, but maybe there's another company putting in a new ERP system, and you two need to work together, right? It's the plumber and the electrician. What are the requirements? How are you going to work together? What is the company trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's such a good point, Bill, because many times we do have customers who will come and say, we want, tasks X, Y, and Z completed. And that's kind of they hire us to complete a scope they've already defined. But in many ways, if they share with us their vision, and their plans, to your point, and more insight into what's happening within their organization and their departmental goals and how this fits into their larger strategy, we may have ideas about how to approach it differently. That can save them money, that can help them be more effective, that can bring in other technology that they may not have been aware of. And so that's really important. I think it allows us to collaborate more effectively in their best interest.
Yeah, so true. And when you're hiring vendors, I mean, you're not just installing technology. You do have the benefit of here's a better process, here's a better way of using this technology, and it really leverages your experience. Rather than just installing something, you're helping them to realize the benefits that they're actually seeking from the technology.
Right.
Well, we want to give a special thanks to Bill for taking time out of his day to do this with us. We really appreciate it. And if you're interested in connecting with Bill and learning more, we'd be happy to set up that introduction. In a follow-up email here, we'll make sure to provide you that information as well.
Yes, we're happy to connect you with Bill. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out. And we're happy to get this slide deck to you afterwards. And we'll be following up with an email next week. Thanks so much for joining us.